It's rare that we get to drive a car that's replacing one that was 13 years old, and despite motoring journalists and car enthusiasts alike maligning the previous MG3, it was a deeply important car for the brand. It was MG's Hyundai Excel, a price leader that brought the brand to Australia, finding homes with first car buyers and rental fleet managers alike. Now here's a stat that might shock you. Though MG is a British badge, of course it's now Chinese owned, Australians bought 4 times more MG3s last year than were sold in the UK. 15,000 plays 4,000. So again, this is a deeply important car to get right for MG. This new vehicle is looking to build on that success. It brings a new platform, plenty of safety features and a fuel-sipping hybrid powertrain to not only help it compete with the Mazda 2 and the Suzuki Swift, but also the hybrid-only Yaris and even at the top end, potentially steal Volkswagen Polo customers. But here's the thing, it's going to have a tougher time than ever finding buyers in Australia because it's going to be so much dearer than the vehicle it replaces. We were promised $5 more expensive, and that's pretty much exactly what happened, except the MG3 is no longer available at drive-away prices. The Excite is now $23,990 before on-road costs, and the hybrid system costs $4 more. That makes the hybrid we've got on test just $500 less than a base Yaris hybrid, while the top spec Essence hybrid is $30K before on-road costs. So what exactly do you get for your money? The Excite features 16-inch alloy wheels, a 10.25-inch touchscreen, digital driver's display, cloth upholstery, manual seat adjust, and a polyurethane steering wheel without reach adjustment. Outside, you can tell the difference between this base car and the more expensive Essence by the LED headlights and a sunroof, otherwise they're visually very similar. Inside the Essence, you get rain-sensing wipers, artificial leather upholstery on the seats and steering wheel, a 360-degree camera, and remote smartphone control of the air conditioning and heating. So while the MG3's list of features is long, for a similar price, the car now only offers comparable equipment to rivals such as the Toyota Yaris and Skoda Fabia, rather than being light years ahead for the price. There's also no true flagship grade to take the fight to the best that the Yaris and the Fabia have to offer. Make sure to check out the full review at carsguide.com.au for all features and pricing. MG is off to a good start with the MG3 at least. I happen to think it's quite handsome. I was skeptical when I saw it in pictures, but in person, the car is quite good looking. And it's blazing its own path. It's not a copy of a Volkswagen Polo or a Mazda 2 or a Ford Fiesta, even though I do see a little bit of Fiesta in the rear three-quarter. MG has definitely started to get its own kind of chic about it, so I think that's a really good thing. I like these headlights, though the base cars are halogen. Spend a bit more, you'll get LED lights, and all vehicles are fitted with 16-inch alloy wheels as standard. Much like the exterior, the MG3's cabin design is quite interesting, and MG is not one of those brands that's copying anymore, rather than the old sort of Volkswagen rip-offs that were happening in the ZS and the HS. It feels like the brand's going in its own direction. You've got a familiar hexagonal steering wheel from the MG4, you've got this nice horizontal, broad, and quite contemporary looking cabin architecture, which I happen to really like, and we'll get to in a second. It's still quite functional. As for the materials, they may be cheap in line with the fact that this is a city car that's going to cost under 30 grand, but they're nicely textured, so this hard plastic doesn't have the same effect as if it was just a raw piece of flat untextured plastic. Same up here on the dashboard, and MG's been very clever where it puts a little bit of vinyl upholstery here just under the screen, which means you can rest your hands on this nice comfortable position while you're using it. It also continues in front of the passenger with this nice little tartan-esque flourish, and the material on the seats of this base car is actually quite nice, high quality, and it doesn't smell bad in here either. It doesn't feel like a cheap rental car, so I think that's all a really, really good sign for the MG3. Now we come to practicalities next, and in the doors there's pockets big enough for water bottles, there's a pair of cup holders here, you've got this sort of tray which is scratchy but does slide, and it helps give you a little bit more covered storage. You've got an armrest, which is not something that gets taken for granted in this class. The Mazda 2 doesn't have one across all grades, and the glove box is pretty decent as well. Now the steering wheel is plastic in this base Excite grade, but the graining on it, again, much like all the other materials in here, means that it's not quite as horrible to hold as a base Hilux. And MG has gone and fixed some of the awkwardness of the steering controls from the MG4. You've now got this side which does the screen and media stuff, and this side is actually labelled to give you a reasonable idea of what it might do with the cruise control, which will help any learning curve when you get into this car. As for build quality, we haven't noticed any rattles or any unpleasant sounds while driving this car out on the road. However, there are some things that give away its cheapness. Listen for this when I flick the roof liner. You can hear it echo in here. We'll get to how that sounds out on the open road. As for technology, the 10.25-inch touchscreen here is nice and responsive. Apple CarPlay is only wired, and that's through a regular USB connection, not a USB-C, but there are both options here, one for mirroring and one for charging, as well as 12-volt socket. There are even some shortcut buttons below the screen for heavily used functions, such as front and rear demister, a shortcut to get to the HVAC, and a home button, which are all really helpful. Ultimately then, the MG3's cabin is very well appointed and thought out for a vehicle of this price. Okay, so you're not expecting that much from the MG3's back seat. It is a very small car after all. But at 188 centimeters, I fit in here with relative comfort. My knees are touching the seat in front of me in my driving position, but it's got a nice soft back and there's plenty of tow room as well. So I'd be comfortable for anywhere up to about an hour in the back of this thing. I've also got a reasonable amount of headroom if I sit up straight, and crucially, the vision out the front is really, really good. I can see straight through the center between the two seats and even over the top of this driver's seat. The windows are pretty decently sized as well, and although they don't have auto up and down function, they are powered, but it is 2024, so I guess that is the least we can expect from a car. You do get more than you might expect though, with two vents back here. That is very rare in this size of car. You also get a USB charge point back here and a little spot perfect for mints or snacks, and even a little bottle holder in the door pockets. The material is much the same as the front seats and therefore quite comfortable, and there's even decent lumbar support from the backrest. So far, the MG3 has impressed quite significantly with its raft of rather nice touches in the cabin. But that's about to change, because although this boot at 293 litres is plenty spacious for the week of shopping, there are some definite cost-cutting measures back here. The chief of which is this non-split folding seat. It's been a long time since I've seen a single backrest in a new car. I couldn't tell you the last time I did, but almost everything in this class has split fold anyway, which is a really nice thing to have if you've got dogs or big things to carry. It's just a nice little addition. Also, you can barely reach the latches and you have to press them both at once to fold the bench down. Then there's the finishing in here. The carpet is very cheap and nasty. The boot floor is pretty flimsy, and you've got one light and one little shopping bag hook. But then again, it is a very cheap, very small car, so you may be very willing to overlook all of that stuff. And at least on the petrol car, you do get a space saver spare tire, though on this hybrid, that's where the 12-volt battery is. Final cheap thing on this vehicle is the sound it makes when you shut the boot. Listen to this. Oh, tinny. So, under this flimsy bonnet is where the magic happens, and what makes this new MG3 a real rival for the Toyota Yaris. It's the hybrid system. It's based around a 1.5-litre four-cylinder engine, which produces 75 kilowatts, and it's got an electric motor and a 1.83 kilowatt-hour lithium-ion battery. MG's literature says the combined system outputs are 155 kilowatts and 420 newton meters. That's plenty to embarrass a Toyota Yaris Hybrid. In fact, it's more power than a Volkswagen Polo GTI and more torque, or the same amount of torque, as a Honda Civic Type R. While we know that peak power and torque figures are often limited to a single RPM or across a very narrow band, the MG3's peaks are in even more specific places thanks to that unique 3-speed hybrid transmission. According to the literature, the maximum combined torque occurs for the MG3 Hybrid Plus at 50 km an hour in parallel mode in second gear. This is then backed up by a complex calculation that you don't really need to understand. What you do need to understand is that, in reality, we notice distinct changes in response depending on the battery's state of charge. This is not something you ever notice in Toyota's more conservative hybrids. If you're buying the hybrid, you're going to care about efficiency. MG's rating is 4.3 litres per 100 Ks in the combined NEDC consumption test. That's a bit worse than a Toyota Yaris. But you can get very, very close to that, and even under it in this car in the right circumstances. Our 200 and something kilometre country test loop saw us get a combined total of 4.8 litres per 100 Ks on the trip computer. In a 50k segment that would sort of encompass a typical Sydney suburban commute, that fell right down to 3.4 litres per 100 k's, which is excellent. But here's the thing with this car. It seems to be a lot more dependent on driving style than, say, a Toyota Yaris Hybrid. With a Yaris, you can be flat out pretty much as you want, and you're still going to easily get under 5 litres per 100 k's, and with a deft foot, you'll easily be able to beat the hybrid consumption figure. This car, as I said, is a little bit different, especially when it's cold. When you first turn it on, that petrol engine fires into life and seems to use a lot of petrol. This morning, in the first 5Ks, it was showing 10 litres per 100 Ks. So use case-wise, the MG3 seems to be a lot more dependent on driving style and scenario than some other hybrids. So the MG3 is definitely designed to be a city car, and that's really what it excels at. In a lot of respects, that's all it needs to do. It's comfortable, it's composed, and the steering system is nice and light around town. Additionally, the turning circle is fantastic. You can really spin around in a lot of Sydney's small streets without any fuss. You don't need to do a 3-point turn, it's just a U-turn away. So it's comfortable and pretty easy to maneuver. The visibility is great out the front 3/4, and for a modern car, it's pretty good out the rear. The reverse camera is also pretty sharp. Around town, as you can hear, sometimes that petrol engine is pretty vocal. It seems to run at idle at about 1200 to 2000 RPM quite a lot of the time to charge the battery, and that's when you can hear it. But the power that you get from the electric motor alone, and as you can hear now, we're in full EV mode, is really decent. It's certainly enough to get you up to real traffic speeds, 50 k's an hour, 60 k's an hour. It seems to be pretty accomplished at doing that. Also, as a bit of a departure from a Toyota hybrid, you have adjustable regenerative braking, which you can anchor to the star button on the steering wheel. 1 is my preference. I find 2 or 3 to be a little bit strangely strong. Now let's tackle that power figure. 155 kilowatts is a lot of grunt for a car that weighs about 1,300 kilos and just has basic struts up front and a torsion beam at the back. But as you'll see, step on the gas, it's nippy. It's actually really nippy for a little car like this. Plenty of power for a city car, but I do question the fact that 155 kilowatt figure or 420 newton meter output is actually accurate. But still, as I said, what matters is how it feels on the road, and it feels fine. You do notice the step changes between the 3 different ratios when you're out in the countryside. You can feel it definitely shift into a top gear at about 85, 90 k's an hour if you're fully accelerating. But again, most of the time, it's pretty well refined and pretty well insulated. The same cannot be said for road noise. Again, in town, not a problem, but if you're going to be doing long drives, this car can be quite tiresome. It's very echoey in here, and it's hard to hear yourself speak at 100 k's an hour, and on a lot of road surfaces around Sydney, that sort of harsh concrete, it is a very noisy car. The suspension though is pretty quiet, and the suspension, as I mentioned at the start, is nice and soft and compliant, which is exactly what you want it to be. It does occasionally pick up harsh edges over bumps, but honestly, for the sort of car and the sort of money you're going to be paying for this, it's pretty decent. It is worth noting that it's not the most talented backroad companion, so if you're going to be regularly travelling long distances on the motorway or on country roads, a Volkswagen Polo or a Toyota Yaris is going to be better. There's a bit of stiction around the straight ahead from the steering system, and it just doesn't feel entirely natural at high speeds. The chassis is decently composed and refined, but it's nothing special. It doesn't set your world on fire, and it's not as fun to drive as a light and playful Mazda 2. Still, that's not the point of the MG3. The idea is for it to be a relatively capable and comfortable city car, and on those metrics, it definitely excels. As for ownership, MG is yet to provide us with full service pricing for the MG3, but if the history of this brand is anything to go by, expect it to be a little bit dearer than the equivalent you'd pay at a Toyota dealership. The vehicle, though, is warranted for 7 years and unlimited kilometres in Australia. Make sure to check out the full review at carsguide.com.au for all the details. After the MG5 sedan's 0-star safety rating, MG will be keen to get the maximum ANCAP stars for this new MG3. The Excite features adaptive cruise control, lane departure warning, AEB, traffic sign monitoring with audible warning, and driver attention monitoring as standard, while rear cross traffic alert and blind spot monitoring are reserved for the upspec Essence. While the kit is sound for a small car, the implementation leaves something to be desired. The lane keep system ping-pongs between lane markings, and the adaptive cruise control logic is unpredictable. There were 2 instances of phantom braking for shadows while we were out driving. As always, make sure to check out the full review at carsguide.com.au for the full details. As far as generational leaps go, the MG3 is pretty astounding. From packaging to powertrains to its chassis, it is improved in every aspect. That is, except price. The base MG3 is still a pretty sharp deal, but the hybrid is only a little more affordable than Toyota's equivalent. So will it find buyers? Well, the petrol-electric version might struggle a bit more than the petrol. The MG3 is definitely going to be worth putting on your shopping list. The hybrid is a really nice powertrain and very efficient when driven properly. I'd love to know your thoughts on this new city car. Let me know them in the comments section down below, and for more details on the MG3 and the whole range, head over to the carsguide.com.au website.